Hello and welcome back. Today is Thursday, January 30th, 2025, and we are reading our second to last chapter, chapter 28 of Abhorsen by Garth Nix today. So, as always, I am excited to read this chapter. I'll do my very best. So, let's get right into chapter 28, The Seven. "Sameth, what have you done now?" were the first words out of Elamir's mouth. But she bellied her speech with an attempt to hug him, which Sam had to shrug away. "No time to explain," he exclaimed as he held out the bloodied Nehema. "I need some of your blood on the blade. Then you have to go and help Aunt Lirael." Elamir immediately complied. In earlier times, Sam would have been surprised by his sister's instant cooperation. But Elamir was no fool, and the towering column of fire beyond the ridge was clearly only the beginning of something terrible and strange. "Mother! Father! I'm so glad you're not dead!" Sam cried as Elamir ran past, her cut palm still dripping blood, and Sabriel and Touchstone clambered up. "Likewise," said Touchstone, but he wasted no time either, holding out his hand so Sam could make the cut. Sabriel put hers out at the same time, but she ruffled Sam's head with her other hand. "I have a sister, or so the Clare tell me, and a new Abhorsen in waiting," said Sabriel, as they wiped their palms on the steel, the marks glowing as they felt the kinship of blood to Charter. "And you've found a different path, but one no less important. I trust you've been helpful to your aunt?" "Yes, I suppose," replied Sam. He was trying to keep all the spell for the foraging in his head, and he didn't have time to talk. "She needs help now. 3 diamonds of protection!" Sabriel and Touchstone were gone before Sam finished speaking. The 2 Clares stood in front of him, holding out their hands. Wordlessly, Sam cut gently into their palms, and they also marked the blade with blood. Sam hardly saw them do it, so many charter marks were whirling around in his head. He didn't feel them take his elbows either and lead him back up the hill. He couldn't think of such mundanities as walking. He was lost in the charter, dredging up marks he hardly knew. Thousands and thousands of charter marks that filled his head with light, spreading inwards and outwards, ordering themselves into a spell that would join with Nehema and the 7 pipes to replicate a weapon that was as deadly to its wielder as to its target. There was no time for greetings farther up the ridge either. Lirael simply snapped out orders as Elamir, Sabriel, and Touchstone arrived. She sent them to help make the first 3 marks of each diamond of protection, saving the last mark till everyone was inside and the diamonds could be completed. For a moment, Lirael had stumbled over her instructions, fearing that they might protest, for who was she to give orders to the king and the Abhorsen? But they didn't, quickly going to their tasks, building the diamonds jointly to save time, each taking a cardinal mark. Major Green hadn't questioned her orders either, Lirael noticed with relief. What was left of his company was running pell-mell across the valley, the able-bodied carrying the wounded, with the major's shouts speeding them on the way. They were shouting at the Sutherlings, too, telling them to lie down and look away. Lirael hoped the Sutherlings would listen, though the sight of the whirling column of fire had the power to entrance as well as terrify. Sam staggered up between Senar and Rael, who smiled at Lirael as they brought him to the center of the incipient diamond. Lirael smiled back, a brief smile that took her back for a moment to the twins' words the day she had left the glacier. "You must remember that, sighted or not, you are a daughter of the Clare." Lirael closed the outer diamond with a cardinal mark and stepped inside the next incomplete diamond. As she passed him, Touchstone let the north mark flow down his sword to close the second diamond behind her. He smiled at Lirael as they stepped back inside the third and final diamond, and she saw the strong resemblance between him and his son. Sabriel herself closed the inner diamond. In only a few minutes, they had raised magical defenses of triple strength. Lirael hoped it would be enough, and they would survive to do what must be done. She had a momentary panic then, and had to quickly count on her fingers to make sure they had the necessary 7. Herself, Sameth, Elamir, Sabriel, Touchstone, Senar, Rael. That was 7, though she was not sure it was really the right 7. The lines of the diamond shone golden, but were pallid in comparison with the fierce light of the column of fire. Vast as that roaring column was, Lirael knew it was only the first and least of the 9 manifestations of the destroyer's power. Worse was to come, and soon. Sam knelt over sword and panpipes, weaving his spell. Lirael checked that the dog and Mogget were safely inside the diamond, and noticed that Nix's body was inside too, which somehow seemed right. There was also a large thistle bush, which was annoying and showed her haste. She hadn't had time to think about where the diamonds should be. Everyone within the diamonds, save Sam, was stiff and awkward for a moment in that strange calm before impending disaster. Then Sabriel took Lirael into a loose embrace and kissed her lightly on the cheek. "So you are the sister I never knew I had," said Sabriel. "I would wish that we'd met earlier, and on a more auspicious occasion. We've had many revelations thrust upon us, more than my tired mind can take in, I fear. We've gone by boat, and van, and airplane, and paper wing to come here, almost without rest, and the Clare have seen a great deal very suddenly. They tell me that we face a great spirit of the beginning, and that you're not only heir to my office, but a remembrancer too, and you've seen the past as other Clare see the future. So please tell us, what must we do?" "I'm so glad you're all here now," replied Lirael. It was terribly tempting to just fall apart during this brief lull, but she could not. Everything depended upon her. Everything. She took a deep breath and continued. "The destroyer is building up to its second manifestation, which I hope the diamonds will save us from. Afterwards, it will diminish for a little time, and it is then we must go down to it, warding ourselves against the fires that the second manifestation will leave behind. The binding spell we will use ourselves is simple, and I will teach it to you now. But first, everyone must take a bell from me, or from the Abhorsen." "Call me Sabriel," said Sabriel firmly. "Does it matter which bell?" "There will be one that feels right, one that will speak to your blood. Each of us will be standing for one of the original 7, as they live on in our bloodlines and in the bells," stammered Lirael, nervous about instructing her elders. Sabriel was quite frightening up close, and it was hard to remember that she was her own sister, not just the near-legendary binder of the dead. But Lirael did know what she was doing. She had seen in the dark mirror how the binding had been done, and how it must be done again, and she could feel the affinities between the bells and the people. Though there was something strange about Sanar and Rael. Lirael looked at them, and her heart almost stopped as she realized that as twins, their spirits were intertwined. They could wield only one bell between them. There would only be 6 of the needed 7. She stood frozen and horrified as the others stepped forward and took their bells from Sabriel. "Sereneth for me, I think," said Sabriel, but she left the bell in the bandolier. "Touchstone?" "Rana for me," replied Touchstone. "The sleeper seems very appropriate, given my past." "I will take a bell from my aunt, if I may," said Elamir. "Dyram, I think." Lirael mechanically handed the bell to her niece. Elamir looked very like Sabriel, with the same sort of contained force inside her. But she had her father's smile, Lirael saw, even through her panic. "We will hold Masriel together," said Sanar and Rael in unison. Lirael shut her eyes. Maybe she hadn't counted right, she thought. But she could feel who should have which bell. She opened her eyes again, and with shaking hands started to undo a strap on her bandolier. "Sam will have Belgair, and I will wield both Astariel and Kibith to make the 7. She spoke as confidently as she could, but there was a quaver in her voice. She could not wield 2 bells, not for this binding. There had to be 7 wielders, not just 7 bells. "Humph," woofed the dog, standing up and wriggling her hindquarters in a somewhat embarrassed fashion. "Not Kibith. I shall stand for myself." Lirael's hand fumbled on the strap that held Astariel silent, and she only just managed to prevent the bell's mournful call, which would send all who heard it into death. "But you said you weren't one of the 7, Lirael protested, though she had long suspected the truth about the dog. She just hadn't wanted to admit it, even to herself, for the dog was her best and oldest friend, long her only friend. Lirael could not imagine Kibbeth as her friend. "I lied," said the dog cheerfully. "That's one of the reasons I'm the disreputable dog. Besides, I'm only what's left of Kibbeth, in a roundabout, hand-me-down sort of way. Not quite the same, but I'll stand against the Destroyer, against Uranus, as one of your 7. As the dog spoke the Destroyer's name, the column of fire roared higher still, and punched through the remnants of the storm clouds. It was more than a mile high now, and dominated all the western sky, its red light defeating the yellow of the sun. Lirael wanted to say something, but the words were choked by incipient tears. She did not know whether they were of relief or sadness. Whatever was to come, she knew nothing would ever be the same with her and the disreputable dog. Instead of speaking, she scratched the dog's head, just twice, running her fingers through the soft dog hair. Then she quickly recited the binding spell, showing everyone the marks and words they would have to use. "Sam is making the sword that I will use to break the Destroyer once it is bound," Lirael finished. At least she hoped he was. As if to reinforce her hope, she added, "He is a true inheritor of the Wallmaker's powers." She gestured to where Sam was bent over Nehema, his hands moving in complex gestures, the names of charter marks tumbling from his mouth as his hands wove the glowing symbols into a complex thread that tumbled out of the air and spilled down upon the naked blade. "How long will it take?" asked Elamir. "I don't know," whispered Lirael. Then she repeated herself more loudly. "I don't know." They stood and waited, anxious seconds stretching out awfully into minutes, as Sam called forth his charter marks, and Uranus rumbled beyond the ridge, both of them building very different spells. Lirael found herself looking down into the valley every few seconds, where it looked like Major Green might be having some success at making the Sutherlings lie down. Then she would look at Sam, then at the Destroyer's fire, and then start all over again, full of different anxieties and fears everywhere she looked. The Sutherlings were still too close, Lirael knew, though they were considerably lower in the valley than they had been. Sam did not seem to be getting any nearer to finishing. The Destroyer was growing taller and stronger, and any minute Lirael knew it would assume its second manifestation, the one for which it was named, the Destroyer. Everyone jumped as Sam suddenly stood. They jumped again as he spoke 7 master marks, one after the other. A river of molten gold and silver flame fell from his outstretched hands, down upon Lirael's bloody sword and the panpipes, which he'd separated into individual tubes and laid along the length of the silvered blade. Moments later, the Destroyer flashed brighter, and the ground rumbled beneath their feet. "Look away and close your eyes!" screamed Lirael. She threw one arm across her face and crouched, facing down towards the valley. Behind her, a shining silver globe, the joined hemispheres, ascended to the sky atop a column of fire. As it rose, the sphere grew brighter and brighter till it was more brilliant than the sun had ever been. It hovered high in the air for a few seconds, as if surveying the ground, then sank back out of sight. For 9 very long seconds, Lirael waited, her eyes screwed shut, her face pushed into her very dirty sleeve. She knew what was to come, but it did not help her. The explosion came as she counted 9, a blast of white-hot fury that annihilated everything in the Loch Valley. The mill and the railway were vaporized in the first flash. The loch boiled dry an instant later, sending a vast cloud of superheated steam roaring to the sky. Rocks melted, trees became ash, the birds and fishes simply disappeared. The lightning rods flashed into molten metal that was hurled high into the air, to fall back as deadly rain. The blast sheared the top of the ridge completely off, destroying earth, rocks, lightning rods, trees, and everything else. Anything left that could burn did, till it was extinguished seconds later by the wind and the steam. The outermost diamond of protection took what was left of the blast after it destroyed the protective earth of the hill. The magical defense flared for an instant, then was gone. The second diamond had the hot wind and the steam that could strip flesh from bone. It lasted only seconds, too, till it gave way. The third and final diamond held for more than a minute, repelling a hail of stones, molten metal, and debris. Then it also failed, but not until the worst had passed. A hot but bearable wind rushed in as the diamond fell and washed around the seven as they crouched on the ground, their eyes still shut, shaken in body and mind. Above them, a huge cloud of dust, ash, steam, and destruction rose, climbing thousands of feet till it spread out like a toadstool top to cover all in shadow. Lirael was the first to recover. She opened her eyes to see ash falling all around like blackened snow, and their little diamond-shaped patch of unharmed dirt, an island in a wasteland where all color had drained away under a sky that was like a cloudy night, with no hint of sun. But it was not the shock it could have been. She had seen it already in the past, and her mind was fully occupied, racing ahead to what they must do, to what she would have to do. "Protect yourselves against the heat!" she shouted, as the others slowly stood and looked around, shock and horror in their eyes. Quickly, she called the marks of protection into being, letting them flow out of her mind and across her skin and clothing. Then she looked for the weapon she hoped Sam had made. Sam held it by the blade and looked puzzled, as if uncertain what he'd wrought. He offered it to Lirael, and she took the hilt, not without a stab of fear. It was not Nehema anymore, and it was not the same sword. It was longer than it had been, with a much broader blade, and the green stone was gone from the pommel. Charter marks ran everywhere through the metal, which had a silvery red sheen, as if it had been washed in some strange oil. An executioner's sword, Lirael thought. The inscription on the blade seemed the same, or was it? She couldn't recall exactly. Now it simply said, "Remember Nehema." "Is that it?" asked Sam. He was white-faced with shock. He looked past her to the valley, but he could not see anything of the Sutherlings or Major Green and his men. There was too much dust, and there was little light. But he couldn't hear anything either, no screams or shouts for help, and he feared the worst. "I did what you said." "Yes," croaked Lirael, her throat dry. The sword was heavy in her hand, and even heavier on her heart. If they bound Uranus, this was what she would use to break it in two, for no binding could long contain the destroyer if it was left entire. This weapon could break Uranus, but only at the cost of the wielder's life. Her life. "Does everyone have a bell?" she asked quickly, to distract herself. "Sabriel, please give Belgair to Sam, and tell him the binding spell." She didn't wait for an answer, but led the way across the blasted ridge, down through the fires and the broken hillside, the pools of ash and the cooling metal, down to the shores of the dry loch, where the destroyer momentarily rested before its third manifestation, which would unleash even greater powers of destruction. A grim party followed her, each holding a bell, the binding spell Lirael had taught them repeated over and over in every head. As they got closer, the stench of free magic overcame the smoke, till its acid reek cut at their lungs, and waves of nausea struck. It seemed to eat at their very bones, but Lirael would not slow her pace for pain or sickness, and the others followed her lead, fighting against the bile in their throats and the cramps that bit inside. The steam had fallen back as fog, and the cloud above brought a darkness close to night, so Lirael had little to guide her but instinct. She chose the way by what felt worst, sure that this would lead them to the sphere that was the core of the destroyer. She knew that if they slowed to try to pick a path by more conventional means, they would soon see a new column of flame, a beacon that would only signal failure. Then, quite suddenly, Lirael saw the sphere of liquid fire that was the current manifestation of the destroyer. It hung in the air ahead of her, dark currents alternating with tongues of fire upon its smooth and lustrous surface. "Form a ring around it," commanded Lirael, her voice weak and small in this abyss of destruction, amidst the darkness and the fog. She drew a Sabriel in her left hand, wincing at the pain. In all the rush, she'd forgotten about Hedge's blow. There was still no time to do anything for it, but then the thought flashed through her mind that soon it wouldn't matter. The sword she rested on her right shoulder, ready to strike. Silently, her companions, her family, old and new, Lirael realized with a pang, spread out to form a ring around the sphere of fire and darkness. Only then did Lirael realize that she had not seen Mogget since the destruction, though he had been inside the Diamond of Protection. She could not see him now, and another little fear flowered in her heart. The ring was complete. Everyone looked to Lirael. She took a deep breath and coughed, the corrosive free magic eating at her throat. Before she could recover and begin the spell, the sphere began to expand, and red flames leapt out from it towards the Ring of Seven, like 1,000 long tongues that sought to taste their flesh. As the flames writhed, Uranus spoke. And that is the end of chapter 28. So, we've got one more to go, and then the epilogue, which I will read together tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I hope you enjoyed that reading. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you would like this video. Leave me a comment if you'd like. I love reading all the comments. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel, even though we're about to finish this book. I have a lot more in store, so stick with me. It's going to be fun. But anyways, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. I will look forward to finishing this book with you tomorrow. So until then, take care. And as always, may your magic manifest. Bye.